Welcome back everyone to the channel where we dive deep into the fascinating world of rare coins, unbelievable values, jaw-dropping errors, and the hidden treasures that could be sitting right in your pocket change. And today we are going to talk about one of the most legendary coins ever discussed in numismatic circles, the 1964 1-cent coin, a coin that most people would think of as just a normal everyday penny. But in the world of collectors, this coin has reached myth-like status because of certain errors, mistakes, minting quirks, and extremely rare variations that push its potential value all the way up to an astonishing $8 million. And when you hear that number, your jaw might drop because it seems unimaginable that a single cent could be worth more than luxury cars, homes, and even life savings. Yet it is very true that coins like this become holy grails for collectors due to the strange mix of historical context, minting errors, and survivor rarity. And the story of the 1964 1-cent is one that pulls you right in because 1964 was a year of massive production for US pennies. Billions upon billions were struck, but tucked inside those billions are the anomalies, the accidental misstrikes, the double dies, the off-centers, the transitional errors, and the oddities that should never have left the mint but somehow slipped into circulation. And those are the coins that take something ordinary and make it extraordinary, turning copper and zinc into literal millions. And when you start to unravel the 1964 cent, you see just how many factors play into its meteoric valuation, because first you have to think about the era itself. The mint was under pressure, coinage demand was at an all-time high, machines were running non-stop, and under such strain, mistakes were inevitable, dies cracked, planchets were flawed, hubs doubled during striking, and alignment errors crept in, and these mistakes, instead of being destroyed as was the mint's usual policy, slipped through and were released into circulation, unknowingly carrying future fortune in the pockets of everyday Americans. And now, decades later, collectors scour through jars, rolls, and collections to see if one of these error-ridden 1964 cents is hiding there. Because if you find one of the right kinds, you are no longer holding a penny, you are holding a life-changing piece of metal. And the fascinating part is that the errors take many forms. Some are double die obverse varieties where Lincoln's profile or the lettering like Liberty or In God We Trust appears doubled and creates a striking appearance under magnification, and collectors go wild for such features because they are direct results of the minting process malfunctioning, proving authenticity. And in 1964 certain double dies are known to exist but are extremely rare. And those are the coins that can push into astronomical prices. And then you have repunched mint marks, because the Denver Mint struck a massive number of pennies in 1964, and at that time mint marks were applied by hand onto the dies, meaning an engraver had to physically punch the D onto the die, and when it was misaligned or punched twice, you got a repunched mint mark, which might seem small but for collectors it makes the coin special, rare, and extremely desirable. And then there are broad strikes, off-center strikes, and clipped planchets, all of which happen during high-speed mass production, where blank planchets sometimes overlapped or got misfed, creating coins that are warped, oddly shaped, or struck off-center, and rather than being trash, these are treasures, because each is unique, a mistake that no machine could perfectly replicate again, and that uniqueness fuels the market, pushing values higher and higher. But the story doesn't end there, because the real jackpot in 1964 pennies lies in transitional errors, where the metal composition and design were in flux, and even the tiniest shift in alloy or strike could create a rarity worth millions. And one legendary variation is the 1964 penny struck on a silver planchet, something that should never have happened, but planchets for dimes or other denominations sometimes accidentally were fed into the penny presses. And so you get a coin with the design of a cent but the metal of a different denomination, and when authenticated, these coins become priceless in the eyes of advanced collectors, fetching auction records that most people wouldn't believe. And that's how we get to the astonishing $8 million valuation, because rarity, demand, error, authenticity, and the story behind the coin all come together to create a perfect storm. And it's not just one kind of error that makes the 1964 cent special. It's the possibility of dozens of error types all occurring in one year, and each variation has its own following. From collectors chasing the dramatic double dies to those chasing the subtle but rare repunched mint marks, to those looking for transitional metals or misstrikes, and every one of these coins carries the allure of mystery. The idea that in some old coffee can of change sitting in someone's attic could lie a coin worth more than a mansion, and that excitement drives the frenzy. Because collectors know that the 1964 cent is out there, hidden, waiting to be discovered, and the more stories that emerge of jaw-dropping auction sales, the more people hunt, and that demand drives prices even higher. Because a numismatic's value is not just about rarity but about desire, and the desire for the 1964 penny with errors has never been higher. And think about how wild it is that in 1964 most people were simply using these pennies for gum, newspapers, or parking meters, never realizing that a single misstruck coin slipping through could one day change someone's life. And when you see the coin under a microscope, the flaws become the features, the mistakes become the magic, and those mistakes are what makes the coin reach millions. Because collectors don't just want perfection, they want the story, the accident, the human touch in an otherwise machine-driven world, and the 1964 penny gives them that in spades. And we can't overlook the fact that condition also plays a huge role, because a circulated era penny might be worth thousands. But an uncirculated mint state example with the same error could push into the millions. And when you combine rarity of error type with pristine condition, you have the ultimate prize, the kind of coin that gets news coverage, that stuns auction houses, and that makes collectors whisper in awe. And when one of these coins hits the market, bidding wars erupt, prices skyrocket, and the legend of the 1964 penny grows bigger, because each record sale cements its place as a coin worth more than its weight in gold many times over. And what's truly fascinating is the psychology. Because owning such a coin is like owning a piece of history, a tangible link to a minting mistake that survived against all odds. And when you realize billions of coins were struck but only a handful survived with the right kind of errors, you understand why someone would pay $8 million for it. Because in a world where rare art, cars, and jewelry fetch similar amounts, a coin of such rarity is equally deserving, if not more so, because it was never meant to exist, yet it does. And that impossibility is what creates value. And so the hunt for the 1964 penny continues, with treasure hunters, coin roll searchers, metal detectorists, and collectors all dreaming of that day when they open a roll, examine a coin, and realize they are holding a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, a copper coin with a story bigger than any dollar amount. And as we share this today, the important thing to remember is that every error, every crack, every doubled letter, every misaligned punch, and every stray planchet tells a story, and together they create the myth of the 1964 1 cent that cost $8 million. And while the chances are slim, the possibility is what drives the dream, the possibility that out there, someone, maybe even one of you watching right now, could stumble across a penny that turns out to be the key to unimaginable fortune. And that's why you should always check your change, always look closely, always keep your eyes open. Because the 1964 penny is proof that history hides treasures in plain sight, treasures that turn mistakes into miracles, and miracles into millions. And the story never ends, because with every new discovery, every new auction, every new collector who enters the game, the legend of this coin only grows stronger. So keep searching, keep believing, and who knows, maybe the next $8 million penny is already in your hands. Next, 1980 USA 1 cent. Today's story is going to blow your mind because we are diving deep into another legendary piece of American coinage that most people see as ordinary but which in reality hides an extraordinary story of errors, mistakes, rarity, and staggering value, and I'm talking about the 1980 USA 1 cent coin. The humble penny that in its most spectacular error forms has been valued as high as $5 million. And before you think that's impossible, remember that numismatics is a world where rarity and human error collide to create treasures worth more than mansions, and the 1980 cent is one of those incredible examples where a coin worth a single cent to the average person can become a life-changing fortune if you happen to find the right kind of error. And that's what makes this coin so captivating, because unlike earlier decades when minting processes were more manual, by 1980 the US Mint had transitioned into higher speed, more automated equipment designed to produce coins on a massive scale, and yet the faster the machinery worked and the more billions of pennies were struck, the more opportunities there were for small errors to slip through, errors that no one at the time paid attention to, but that collectors today chase with feverish excitement. And the fascinating thing about the 1980 penny is that it was a year of transition and high demand. With billions struck at both Philadelphia and Denver, and because of this enormous mintage you might think nothing about the year would stand out, but it is precisely in this ocean of ordinary coins that extraordinary mistakes took place, because dies wore out faster, planchets were rushed into presses, and mint employees were pushed to keep up with demand, leading to cracks, doubling, off-center strikes, and transitional anomalies that would turn a throwaway penny into a golden ticket. And the crown jewel among these is the legendary double die-up verse of 1980, where the lettering, date, or even Lincoln's profile can appear double due to the die-hubbing process. And for collectors, this is like striking oil because doubling is not only visible proof of error but also something visually dramatic that even the naked eye can sometimes spot, and these coins have sold for jaw-dropping amounts at auction, with perfect examples rumored to fetch values into the millions. And that's where the $5 million figure comes in, because if you combine such a dramatic error with pristine, uncirculated condition, you have a once-in-a-lifetime rarity that advanced collectors will fight tooth and nail to own. And then there are the mint mark anomalies, because 1980 was the very first year that pennies struck in Philadelphia actually included a mint mark, the P, which had never before appeared on a cent, and this change brought new possibilities for minting quirks. And although Philadelphia struck the vast majority of coins without issues, some rare repunched mint marks or misapplied P marks have been rumored, and those tiny differences matter immensely in the collecting world, because even a small misplacement or doubling of the mint mark can send values skyrocketing. And then we have to talk about off-center strikes, broad strikes, and clipped planchets, which happen when the blank planchet isn't properly fed into the coining press, causing the design to be struck off balance, shifted, or even partially missing, and in 1980, with machines running full throttle, these errors were inevitable, and when you get an off-center strike that still shows the date fully visible, collectors go wild, because it makes the coin not only rare but also identifiable, and those kinds of dramatic off-center coins can command staggering prices at auction, sometimes tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, and in the rarest condition and combination of errors, millions. And speaking of combinations, the 1980 penny has another claim to fame in transitional errors. Because at this time the mint was still producing cents out of 95% copper and 5% zinc, but change was on the horizon as the mint would soon transition to copper-plated zinc in 1982, and whenever transitions happen, mistakes occur, like a copper planchet being left over from an earlier batch or a zinc planchet being accidentally struck early. And these transitional composition errors are the ultimate jackpot for collectors, because they represent a coin that should not exist, a physical mistake that slipped past mint quality control, and when authenticated, transitional errors can become million-dollar pieces. And the 1980 cent is rumored to have examples of this, pennies struck on the wrong metal planchets, which instantly elevates their value into the millions, and collectors will pay absolutely anything to secure one because of how rare and historically important such an error is. And this is what drives the myth and value of the 1980 penny up to that legendary $5 million mark, because when you think about it, billions of coins were struck, but only a handful, maybe even just one or two, survived with the right kind of dramatic error, the right metal, and the right condition, and that combination is what makes fortunes. And to understand why collectors value these so highly, you have to consider the psychology of rarity, because owning one of these coins is not just about money. It's about prestige, about holding something no one else has, a one-of-a-kind artifact of U.S. history that ties directly to the story of how coins were made, and when that artifact is so rare that maybe only one exists, the price tag becomes secondary, because the desire to own it drives bidding wars that can reach millions, and the 1980 penny is at the center of such desire because it sits in an interesting moment in numismatic history, straddling the line between old and new compositions, between traditional minting and modern mass production, and so the errors from that year have special significance. They are markers of a mint system in transition, and every collector wants a piece of that history, And now imagine someone like you going through an old jar of change, a forgotten roll of pennies tucked away in a drawer, and spotting one of these errors, maybe a dramatic doubled die where Lincoln's profile looks doubled, maybe an off-center strike with the date fully intact. Or maybe just a coin that feels different in weight, and turns out to be struck on the wrong planchet, and suddenly you're not just holding a penny, you're holding a treasure worth $5 million. And that's why these stories captivate people, because they remind us that unimaginable wealth could be hiding in the most ordinary of places. And that possibility is what fuels the hunt, and it's why coin roll hunters, metal detectorists, and casual collectors are always searching. Because they know that history has left behind these treasures, and every time a new auction record is set, the legend of the 1980 penny grows bigger, because it proves that mistakes can be miracles, and miracles can be millions. And what makes it even more exciting is that condition plays such a massive role, because a circulated 1980 penny with an error might be valuable, but in mint state condition, with blazing luster and no wear, that same error could push values into millions. And when you think about the fact that a handful of these coins have survived untouched in old rolls or mint sets, you realize that the possibility is not as far-fetched as it seems, and when the right coin comes to auction, collectors know it could set new records, and that's why experts constantly remind people to check their coins, to use magnification, to weigh them carefully, to look for any signs of doubling, off-centering, odd color, or strange weight, because those clues could be the key to a fortune. And the 1980 penny is proof of that, proof that no coin is too common to hide a secret. Proof that history rewards the observant, and proof that the smallest details can make the biggest difference. And that's why today we talk about it not as just a penny, but as a potential $5 million masterpiece, a coin where the ordinary became extraordinary through nothing more than mistakes, chance, and survival. And the story doesn't end here, because every time someone searches through their coins, every time a new collector enters the hobby, every time a forgotten roll is opened, the possibility of another discovery remains, and that possibility is what keeps the legend alive, making the 1980 USA 1 cent one of the most exciting and valuable coins ever to exist. Next, 1981 D USA 1 cent, another incredible deep dive into the world of rare coins where the tiniest mistakes lead to fortunes that most people could never imagine. And today's spotlight is on a coin that you have probably seen countless times in your pocket change, but which in its rarest and most dramatic error forms has been valued at an unbelievable $4 million. And I am talking about the 1981 D USA 1 cent coin, a penny that most people would dismiss as ordinary because billions were struck at the Denver Mint that year, but which in reality holds one of the most fascinating stories in numismatics. Because the year 1981 marked a turning point in U.S. coinage history, a transitional period just before the major switch in composition from 95% copper to copper-plated zinc, and as history has shown us, whenever transitions are happening in coin production, mistakes and anomalies tend to slip through, and those mistakes are exactly what transforms a 1 cent piece into a multi-million-dollar treasure. And what makes this coin so exciting is not just the sheer improbability of its value but the incredible variety of errors, die varieties, and striking mishaps that make the 1981 D cent one of the most sought-after coins in the world. And to understand why we need to start with the context, because in 1981 the U.S. Mint was under pressure. Demand for coinage was massive, copper prices were rising, and preparations were already underway for the switch to zinc planchets in 1982, and that environment of pressure, high-speed production, and transition meant that dies were wearing out quickly, planchets were being rushed into presses, and mint employees were working under immense strain, which is the perfect recipe for errors, and those errors are what we treasure today, because while billions of normal 1981 D cents exist, only a tiny handful of error coins survived. And those are the ones that bring life-changing money. And let's break down the most important types, starting with the double die obverse, which is one of the most famous and collectible error types in all U.S. coinage. And for the 1981 D cent there are examples where the motto "I in God we trust," the word liberty, and even the date itself appear doubled due to a misalignment during the die hubbing process. And these coins are visually dramatic, easy to spot under magnification, and immensely valuable, and when found in pristine mint state, they can easily fetch hundreds of thousands, if not millions, because collectors will pay anything for an authentic double die. And now imagine pairing that with the rarity of being from the transitional period before the 1982 change, and suddenly you have a coin that could push the $4 million mark at auction. And then you have repunched mint marks. Because remember that in 1981, even though the mint had adopted newer technologies, the D-mint mark at Denver was still sometimes subject to manual punching onto dies, and this meant that misplacements, doubling, or overlapping punches could occur, leading to a repunched mint mark, which might seem like a small detail, but for collectors it is pure gold, because each repunched mint mark is unique and creates another layer of rarity. And for those hunting 1981 D-cents, finding an RPM could mean the difference between pocket change and a 6-figure or 7-figure payday. And then we have to talk about off-center strikes, broad strikes, and clipped planchets, which happen when the blank planchet is fed incorrectly into the press or when the metal strip from which planchets are cut leaves incomplete blanks, and in the high-speed production environment of 1981, these errors were inevitable, and the results are spectacular coins where Lincoln's portrait is shifted dramatically to one side, or where part of the coin is literally missing due to a clipped edge. And collectors adore these coins because they are so visibly different, and the more dramatic the off-center, especially when the full date is still visible, the higher the value climbs, and some of these coins can reach 6 figures, and when combined with other errors, even higher. But perhaps the most legendary errors of 1981 D-cents are the transitional composition errors, because this was the final year before the official switch to zinc. And yet some coins have been discovered that appear to have been struck on experimental planchets of different alloys, or even leftover blanks from other denominations, and these are the types of errors that numismatic dreams are made of, because they should not exist, and when authenticated, they command astronomical prices, and there are stories of 1981 D-cents struck on dime planchets, making them smaller and lighter, or struck on experimental alloys that differ slightly in weight and color. And those are the kinds of rarities that collectors will pay millions for, because they combine historical significance with sheer rarity, and it's these transitional and off-metal errors that push the value of a 1981 D-cent into the $4 million range, because only one or two may exist, and owning one means owning a piece of history that no one else can claim. And what's fascinating is that even the most subtle variations can matter, because in the world of high-level collecting, details are everything. And specialists will pay fortunes for coins that show even the tiniest trace of doubling, mispunching, or alloy differences. And this creates a market where competition drives values higher and higher, and we've seen auction records prove that the hunger for unique era coins is insatiable, and the 1981 D-cent sits right at the center of this frenzy, because it is both a product of its time and a survivor of mistakes. And when you think about it, billions of 1981 D-cents were struck, they were used for decades in circulation. Most were worn down, lost, or melted, but the rare survivors with dramatic errors are now treasures beyond imagination, and condition is another factor that makes a huge difference, because a coin in circulated condition might already be valuable, but the same coin in mint state with red blazing luster and perfect preservation is exponentially more valuable, and that's why collectors prize coins found in original rolls or mint sets, because those are the ones that could survive untouched for decades, hiding their secrets until discovered by a sharp-eyed collector. And the idea that one of these coins could be sitting unnoticed in a jar of change, in a forgotten roll in someone's desk, or in a collection passed down through generations is what excites people, because it means the treasure hunt is still alive, and every search through pennies is a chance to stumble upon a $4 million prize, and that possibility is what fuels the legend of the 1981 D-cent. And when you see a dramatic error under magnification, when you notice the doubling on the date, the misaligned mint mark, the shifted strike, or when you weigh a coin and realize it doesn't match the standard, that thrill of discovery is unlike anything else, because you realize you're holding something that was never meant to exist, a mistake that survived against all odds, and in the world of numismatics, those mistakes are miracles, and miracles are worth millions, and the fascinating part is that the story is still being written. Because new discoveries keep emerging, new varieties are catalogued. And every year collectors find fresh reasons to re-examine their 1981 D cents. And as long as the legend of these coins circulates, the value will continue to grow. And so we say once again that the 1981 DUSA 1 cent is not just a penny, it is potentially a $4 million masterpiece, a coin that proves the smallest details can make the biggest difference. And that history hides treasures in plain sight, waiting for someone with the patience, passion, and sharp eyes to uncover them. And who knows, maybe one of you watching or listening right now will be the next person to discover a coin like this, a coin that changes your life forever. Because the hunt is real, the treasure is real, and the story of the 1981 D cent is proof that miracles happen when you least expect them. Next, 1982 DUSA 1 cent uncover the hidden treasures hiding in your pocket change and take you on a journey through the incredible world of numismatics where a tiny piece of copper or zinc can turn into a life-changing fortune. And today we are diving into one of the most fascinating and talked about coins in all of American coin collecting history, the 1982 DUSA 1 cent coin. A coin that in its rarest form has been valued at an eye-popping $3 million. And before you say how can a simple penny be worth that much, let me take you through the story of why the 1982 D penny is so special, so mysterious, and so sought after by collectors around the globe. Because unlike many other coins we've talked about where errors or doubling or off-center strikes created rarity, the 1982 penny carries an even more dramatic and historically important backstory. It was struck in the middle of one of the most significant changes in U.S. coinage composition in modern history, a year of massive transition, confusion, and experimentation, and out of that storm came one of the most incredible rarities of all time, and that's why when you hear the number $3 million you understand that it's not just hype, it's the reality of what happens when history, rarity, and collector demand collide in the perfect storm. So let's start with the context. Because in 1982 the US Mint was facing a major problem. The rising price of copper had made it too expensive to continue producing pennies out of the traditional 95% copper and 5% zinc composition. By that point the metal in the coin was actually worth more than the face value of the coin itself, which made no economic sense, so the Mint made the decision to switch to a cheaper composition of copper-plated zinc, where the coin would still look like copper on the outside but have a zinc core that drastically reduced the cost of production. And 1982 was the year this transition happened, but instead of being clean and simple, the transition created chaos, because both compositions were struck in the same year, some with copper, some with zinc, and on top of that the Mint was also experimenting with different date styles, both large date and small date varieties, so suddenly you had a year where multiple combinations of composition and design existed: copper large date, copper small date, zinc large date, zinc small date. And then factor in the different Mint locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and you can see how complex and messy 1982 pennies really are. And it is exactly in that mess where mistakes and rarities were born. And one of the most legendary of those is the 1982 D small date copper cent, which is the coin that has stunned collectors by selling for astronomical sums, because officially, number 1982 D small date cents should exist in copper. They were all supposed to be struck in zinc once Denver began the switch, but somehow, whether by accident, oversight, or a leftover copper planchet being used, a tiny handful of 1982 D small date pennies were struck in copper, and these are coins that should not exist, yet they do, and that makes them priceless, because they are the very definition of rarity, coins that represent a historical mistake, coins that prove the unpredictability of the minting process, and coins that collectors will pay any amount to own. And when authenticated, these coins can fetch millions, with some sales and estimates putting their value at up to $3 million depending on condition, and that's why people go crazy for them, because they are not just pennies, they are unicorns, holy grails, the kind of coin that numismatists dream about finding. And the incredible thing is that there may be more out there waiting to be discovered, because billions of pennies were struck in 1982, and not every single one has been examined. So the possibility that another copper 1982 D small date cent is sitting unnoticed in someone's change jar is very real, and that possibility is what keeps collectors searching, because the hunt for this coin is like a treasure hunt where the treasure could be hiding in plain sight, and to understand why collectors are willing to pay $3 million, you need to think about how numismatic value is created. It's a combination of rarity, demand, and story. And the 1982 D small date copper cent has all three in spades. It is rare to the point of being nearly unique. It has demand because collectors everywhere want the ultimate prize for their collections, and it has a story, the story of being struck in a year of chaos, a coin that officially should not exist, a survivor of a mistake that slipped through the cracks, and that story is what makes people willing to spend fortunes, because owning the coin is like owning a piece of American history, a piece of the mint's most dramatic transition. And beyond the copper versus zinc rarity, the 1982 D penny also has other errors and varieties that collectors chase, including double dies, where the date, lettering, or Lincoln's profile appear double due to a hubbing error, and these can be valuable on their own, fetching thousands or tens of thousands of dollars depending on severity. And then there are off-center strikes, broad strikes, and clipped planchets, all of which happened as machines worked overtime to produce billions of pennies in 1982. And each of these errors adds another layer of rarity, but none compared to the drama of the transitional composition error, and it is that transitional error that takes the 1982 D penny from being worth a cent to being worth $3 million. Because imagine the thrill of weighing a 1982 D penny and discovering that instead of weighing the 2.5 grams of a zinc cent, it weighs the 3.1 grams of a copper cent. And then realizing it has the small date style, and then realizing you might be holding one of the most valuable pennies in existence. The adrenaline of that moment is why collectors never stop searching, and it's why the story of the 1982 D cent keeps being told, because it is not just a coin, it is a dream, and that dream is what drives people to go through box after box, roll after roll, jar after jar, because the reward is beyond imagination, and what makes the story even richer is the fact that condition plays such a massive role. Because in numismatics the difference between a circulated coin and an uncirculated mint state coin can mean the difference between thousands and millions, and for a coin as rare as the 1982 D small date copper cent, condition is everything, because a coin preserved in pristine mint state could shatter auction records, and that's why collectors are constantly checking not just the weight but also the surface, the luster, the strike, every tiny detail, because perfection multiplies value. And when you combine perfection with impossibility, you get the kind of coin that makes headlines. The kind of coin that people remember for decades. And the 1982 D penny is exactly that, a coin that has crossed from ordinary to extraordinary, from common to legendary, from 1 cent to $3 million. And when you think about how many pennies have been tossed aside, lost, or overlooked, it makes you realize that treasures are hiding all around us, and the lesson of the 1982 D cent is clear. Never underestimate the smallest coin, because it might carry the biggest surprise, and this is why the hunt continues, why coin roll hunters, metal detectorists, and casual collectors alike are obsessed with checking their 1982 pennies, because the possibility of finding one is enough to fuel endless excitement, and the reality is that someone, someday, will stumble upon another one, maybe in an old jar in the attic, maybe in a roll from the bank, maybe in a forgotten collection, and when that happens, the legend will grow even bigger, and the value could climb even higher, because with every discovery, every auction, every headline, the 1982 D penny proves that mistakes can be miracles, and miracles can be worth millions, and that is why this coin is one of the most captivating stories in all of American coinage, a reminder that history is full of surprises, and that even the humblest penny can become a priceless treasure if struck in the right way at the wrong time. Next, 1996 D USA 1 cent. The smallest details on the tiniest coins can turn into the biggest treasures of your life. And today we are going to explore a coin that seems so modern and ordinary that most people would never even think to give it a second glance, yet in its rarest and most dramatic era forms it has been valued at a staggering $2 million. And that coin is none other than the 1996 D USA 1 cent coin, a penny that billions of Americans have seen, spent, and ignored, but in the world of numismatics it carries a story that proves once again why you should never underestimate even the most common-looking coin, because it is not the date alone that gives a coin its value but the errors, the mistakes, the misstrikes, and the impossible circumstances that allow a handful of extraordinary pieces to slip through into circulation, and when those pieces are authenticated and discovered, they turn from pocket change into fortunes that can change someone's life overnight. And the 1996 penny is the perfect example of this, because the Denver Mint in 1996 struck an enormous number of 1-cent coins, billions upon billions, and under normal circumstances you would assume that none of them could ever be rare. But mass production on such a scale is precisely when errors are most likely to occur, because dies wear out faster, planchets are rushed, machines misfeed, and quality control simply cannot catch everything, and as history has always shown us, it only takes 1 or 2 coins slipping through with the right kind of error for a legend to be born, and in the case of the 1996 penny, several categories of errors and varieties have made it one of the most exciting coins to search for, with the crown jewel being worth up to $2 million at auction. So let's unravel the reasons why this humble penny can command such a fortune. And it starts with one of the most famous categories in all of error coinage, the double die, because doubling occurs when a coin die is struck more than once with a misalignment during hubbing, creating coins where the design elements like the date, the motto "I in God we trust," or the word liberty appear doubled, and for collectors this is one of the most thrilling and desirable types of error because it is dramatic, authentic, and easily visible even without magnification in some cases, and in 1996 cents. There are examples of double dies that have surfaced, and while many are minor, some are significant enough to send values into the stratosphere, especially in mint state condition. And when you pair that with the fact that the 1996 penny is a relatively modern coin, it means many still survive in pristine condition, which only fuels the potential for record-breaking prices. And then we move on to repunched mint marks, which in 1996 are less common than in earlier decades because minting technology had modernized, but anomalies in the D mint mark have been reported, where the D appears doubled or slightly misplaced, and while subtle, these anomalies matter immensely to variety collectors who are willing to pay fortunes for unique examples. And then of course we must consider off-center strikes, broad strikes, and clipped planchets, which are some of the most visually exciting types of errors that can occur when planchets are not fed into the press correctly or when blanks are cut improperly from the metal strip. And these errors create coins where Lincoln's portrait is shifted dramatically to one side, or where part of the coin is missing entirely, or where the design is spread out unnaturally across a wider surface. And these kinds of mistakes immediately catch the eye and are highly collectible, and the more dramatic the error, the higher the value, with fully visible dates on dramatic off-center strikes commanding the biggest premiums. And then we reach one of the most fascinating categories that pushes the 1996 penny into legendary status, the transitional and off-metal planchet errors. Because while by 1996 the official composition of pennies was firmly set at copper-plated zinc, mistakes still happened where leftover planchets from other denominations or incorrect metal blanks were fed into the presses, creating coins that were struck on planchets of the wrong metal. And these are the types of coins that collectors dream about because they should not exist. And when authenticated, they can reach values of hundreds of thousands or even millions, and there have been stories of 1996 pennies struck on dime planchets, making them smaller and lighter, or on foreign planchets that were in use at the Denver Mint for producing coins for other countries. And these wrong planchet strikes are some of the most spectacular errors in all of coinage because they are both visually fascinating and historically important. And when you pair that with the sheer improbability of their survival, you have a recipe for million-dollar coins, and in fact it is. The discovery of these rare transitional and off-metal errors in the 1996 penny that has pushed its potential auction value up to the $2 million mark. Because think about it, out of billions of ordinary pennies, perhaps only 1 or 2 exist with these extraordinary mistakes. And that level of rarity is what collectors pay fortunes for, because rarity is king in numismatics. And when rarity is combined with a dramatic story and undeniable authenticity, you get prices that defy imagination, and the 1996 penny delivers all three. And it's not just about the errors themselves but also about the condition, because a circulated example of an error coin might already be valuable, but a mint state, uncirculated, blazing red example with full luster can multiply the value many times over, and for the 1996 cent. Examples in mint condition are more likely to survive given how recent the date is, and that means when the right error is found in the right condition, it can command astronomical sums, and this is why collectors obsessively search their change, their penny rolls, and their collections for 1996 cents, because the possibility of stumbling upon one of these extraordinary coins is very real, and the payoff is life-changing, and the psychology of it is fascinating, because people know that billions of ordinary pennies exist. But it only takes one extraordinary coin to change everything, and that hope is what fuels the hunt, the idea that maybe in a jar of coins you've ignored for years lies a tiny copper-plated zinc disc that could be worth $2 million, and the lesson of the 1996 cent is that no coin is too modern, too common, or too ordinary to be extraordinary, because history has shown us again and again that mistakes are what make miracles, and those miracles are what make millionaires, and every time a new error discovery is confirmed, the legend of the 1996 penny grows stronger, and its place in numismatic history becomes more secure, because it proves that even in an age of modern minting technology, perfection is impossible, and it is in imperfection that value is born. And so the 1996 USA 1-cent coin is not just a penny, it is a treasure, a reminder that fortune can hide in plain sight, and a symbol of why collectors around the world never stop searching. Because the dream of finding that one extraordinary coin is what keeps the hobby alive, and maybe, just maybe, one of you listening right now will be the next to discover a coin like this, a coin that transforms your pocket change into $2 million. And that is the magic of the 1996 cent, a story of mistakes turned into miracles, and miracles turned into millions.